I'm no good at taking good advice, and I'm self-careless, so don't tell me twice that lately I've been so stuck in my head that I forget just about everything my therapist said. Maybe I'm self-helpless. Maybe I'm self-helpless. Maybe I'm self-helpless. Maybe we are all self-helpless.
Hey everyone, welcome to Self-Helpless. I'm Delanie Fischer, and today I'm chatting with Thais Gibson, who is a best-selling author, counselor, and expert in attachment theory. And Thais breaks down the 4 different attachment styles and how they are formed early on in childhood. We discuss if it's possible for your style to change over time. She explains how you can determine the difference between an attachment style and a personality disorder. And she also gives examples of how each style approaches relationships so you can start to understand which attachment style you and your loved ones might be. Thais even gave me a little diagnostic of my own attachment style, which was incredibly fascinating. And I know that we've touched on this topic a little bit here and there on past episodes. I think me, Taylor, and Kelsey discussed attachment styles together and tried to guess what our styles were at some point. But honestly, I didn't know myself as well back then as I do now, and wasn't really aware of what my attachment style even was. So, this episode is not only very different because we have a qualified professional talking about it, but I personally have a lot more insight into my own shit now that I was able to use as examples during my conversation with Thais. So I share some personal stuff about my relationship with my husband in this episode. And just a heads up, I got his permission to share it. So I'm not talking smack over here or anything. Just wanted to let you know. All right, let's get into attachment styles, shall we? What is attachment theory? What are attachment styles? How are they formed? Just the basics to get us started.
Absolutely. So, attachment theory originally was the work of John Bowlby out of Cambridge University and later Mary Ainsworth. And it's basically the study of how our relationships to our parents or caregivers as children affect our adult relationships, particularly romantic ones, but really there's an impact on our friendships, our co working relationships, basically every relationship in our lives. So, this has been around for quite some time. There are 4 major attachment styles. And the body of work that we created had a lot to do with how we can actually change our attachment styles. If
Mm.
we have painful patterns of conditioning in childhood and we want to actually become more securely attached. So there are 4 attachment styles. The first one is the secure attachment style. And traditionally, this is sort of the optimal attachment style to work towards if we aren't this attachment style already. And this is because securely attached individuals basically report having the healthiest relationships, the longest lasting relationships, and also feeling the most fulfilled in their relationships overall. And securely attached children, this actually is formed because in their early childhood, they have a lot of what we call approach oriented behaviors from their caregivers. So this means that if they are distressed as children, they cry, they're upset, their parents or caregivers consistently go towards them to try to figure out what was wrong and soothe them. And it sounds like a really
Mm.
small thing, but it has this huge impact because basically a child gets conditioned to feel like my emotions are safe to express. It's safe to rely on people. It's safe to trust other people. I'm worthy of love, even in my hard moments where I'm feeling stressed out.
Wow.
And so, as a result of all of this, they feel this greater sense of self confidence in themselves and in their relationships. They have healthy modeling for communication and co regulation as adults. So, this is part of what creates these really healthy or more lasting relationships later on. So, that's our secure. And then
Okay.
we have 3 insecure attachment styles.
Oh no, 3 to 1. That's not good.
So statistically, we'd see securely attached people be about 50% of the population, but it's actually on the decline the past 20 years or so. So it's looking like it's sort of, sitting maybe around 35% or so. So of the insecures,
Yeah.
we have at one end of the continuum in a way, the anxious attachment style. So this individual usually grows up in a household where there's very loving parents, but there's a lot of inconsistency. So it could be that the parents are very loving, but maybe they work really long hours. So the children are always left with the grandparents who are a little more cold or not there as much. Or maybe the parents are really loving, but then the kids are always in after school programs. Or maybe the parents are really loving, but there's a big loss in the family that takes place. Somebody passes away and the parents sort of retreat for a little while during that time. But basically, as a result of the inconsistency, children who are anxiously attached grow up feeling like love is there, but then it's taken away. So
Mm.
they really want love, but they fear it being taken away. And so some of the root causes here could be anything related to that, or even if there is like a divorce and one parent leaves, or if there is a death in the family at a young age, any of those things where there's either real or perceived abandonment. And so as an adult, this individual grows up and they're like constantly afraid of abandonment. And they constantly basically contort themselves, change themselves to be who they want people to think of them as. And they people please like crazy. They put themselves last. They always feel like they're not good enough. They're scared of being a burden or abandoned or disliked or rejected. Like those are these big fears. And this individual, when they feel triggered in a relationship, they will often cling. So it's what we call activating strategies, meaning they will try to get closer to people and get more proximity to others instead of being able to self-soothe or self-regulate. So they may call somebody a whole bunch of times or text a lot or get really distressed, maybe show up unannounced, things like this. And these are their, coping mechanisms essentially from not feeling like they had this consistency and safety of connection in childhood.
I have so many questions for you, but I feel like my attachment style has almost changed the older I've gotten, or maybe the more therapy I've had. And so I have
Yeah,
questions about that because I actually didn't. So you're saying that even if somebody's caregiver, primary caregivers were around and didn't leave the kid, they can still have that abandonment issue.
absolutely.
So
Oh, yeah.
that's really fascinating. That kind of makes me think of my own previous attachment style a little bit differently. So
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, continue. This is so interesting.
Yeah, and part of the reason that that actually happens is because we get conditioned through repetition and emotion. It's what fires and wires our neural pathways. So even, we could have two people and one person could have a real abandonment, like the loss of a parent who passes away, God forbid, or something like that. We can have one really intense program that we acquire, or we can have tons and tons and tons of repeated experiences of what we could consider really small T trauma that over time would actually have a really similar output to big T trauma as a one off experience. But
Yeah.
they're generally going to have a similar impact on the subconscious mind.
Is it a given that, let's say somebody loses a parent from a young age or something, that kind of big T trauma, is it basically a guarantee that they're going to have some kind of insecure attachment style, or can somebody experience that and then have a secure attachment style growing up?
Because of neuroplasticity, it's gonna create some sort of imprint for sure.
Okay.
But you could make an argument that it's possible, and lots of people have had this experience where they lose a parent, for example, but then they have a parent who really steps up to the plate, promotes a lot of secure behaviors, really shows up in healthy ways. And what you're really looking at is like the balance of repetition and emotion. So if somebody goes through a really traumatic event, but then it's met with so much connection and everything to oppose abandonment, connection, safety, certainty by that parent being there, by having a great support system and network, then there could still be the grieving of the loss of a parent, but it may not actually impact the mind in a way where that person now for sure has an anxious attachment style. They may have a wound and some grieving to do, but that could actually be outweighed or overpowered by a lot more repetition and emotion of positive, secure experiences. So you can think of neuroplasticity as really being like the firing and wiring of patterns over time. And it's going to be where more of the juice is, basically. Like, was there more juice behind the painful event, or was there more juice and support behind everything to support after that painful event? And that's really going to be what causes that person to have their attachment style shaped over time.
Oh, wow.
So, the
Okay.
dismissive avoidant attachment style, their overarching theme in childhood is emotional neglect. And this could be like, it doesn't have to be overt emotional neglect, kind of like the anxious. There doesn't have to be an intense abandonment, right? So, there could be like an actual, really overt form of neglect where like parents are literally never around, child's left alone from a young age all the time. Or there could be more covert neglect where a child grows up and like food's on the table and structure is there and parents are around, but they're just not available. They're like not present. They're not really paying that much attention. If the child cries or expresses emotion, it's like, hey, can you just go deal with it and come back later? Or the child may even be like rejected or shamed for having emotion and put down for it. Like, oh, don't be such a baby, get it together, figure it out. Like, just a lot of messaging that's basically them being taught that, okay, I should repress my emotions to be worthy of acceptance. And my emotions being expressed to others really aren't doing any good for me. It's not helping me. It's just getting me denied or deflected further. So this child will grow up because of that overarching theme of neglect to basically reject and disconnect from their own emotions as a result. And that's where they feel like they are safe. And so as a result of that, they don't wanna be, big feelers as adults. They really don't wanna get too close to people. They get afraid of feeling too much emotion or having to express too much emotion because they think it makes them weak or shameful in a sense. And so what they do as adults is they tend to keep everybody at arm's length. And it will sort of be like, as soon as things get too real in a relationship or the feelings get too strong, this person is likely to kind of cut and run or fear commitment or jump ship all of a sudden when things are getting too close too soon because all of their conditioning and upbringing, they dealt with what they went through by keeping people at arm's length. And that's what made them feel safe and like they had a sense of control. So their whole personality is almost built on that premise in various ways. And so they get really afraid of anybody making them feel too much. And so
Oh,
they'll keep people away to keep that vulnerability away as a result. And
okay.
the fearful avoidant actually is sometimes referred to as the anxious avoidant. They actually have the side of the anxious, the fear of abandonment, and the side of the dismissive avoidant. And they tend to really oscillate back and forth a lot. And the reason for this is that the fearful avoidant usually grows up in a lot of chaos, where their conditioning is that they have some really good moments of love and connection, where sometimes love is really good and it's safe and it's healthy and they're connected and they don't want to lose that. But they have some really painful and chaotic moments. So, obvious examples would be things like growing up with a parent who was an addict, where maybe when that parent's sober, they're really loving, but maybe when they're not sober, they're really unpredictable and even scary. Growing up with a parent who has a personality disorder, like narcissistic personality disorder. Sometimes that parent love bombs and they're really loving, and other times they're really mean and even cruel or harsh. Or growing up in a household where there could be abuse of some kind. So these types of scenarios would cause somebody to have some positive associations towards love, but some really negative and scary ones. And so as adults,
Mm.
this person is like, come get close to me, come get close. And you get close and they're like, get back. I changed my mind. And they're very hot and cold, back and forth, flip flopping between should I stay or should I go? And they usually are the individuals in relationships that are the roller coaster relationships, right? They're the people who they don't really know how to feel safe and settle in. Everything's on like the high or the low. And there's these, peaks and valleys of the relationship of connection. And so you'll tend to see this person have a little more volatility in the relationship, be a little harsher with their words, be a little bit unpredictable, give a lot of mixed messages. And they can be really passionate and loving, but they can also really ice people out and stonewall and sometimes be a little more difficult in terms of arguments with a little more volatility or anger or frustration being expressed. So those are the four attachment styles.
Okay. Wow. Okay. I have so many questions. So maybe we could do a little diagnostic on 20-something-year-old Delanie really quick because I, okay. So I started to notice that I was drawn to emotionally unavailable men. And then I would absolutely push people away who treated me really well. I think looking back now, I almost felt it felt uncomfortable or unfamiliar in a way. So I think my response was maybe just I don't know what that is. So, but I know what this
um,
is over here. So what is that? Which one is that?
yeah, let me ask you a couple clarifiers
Okay.
because it could fall into
Yes.
one of two categories. So,
Okay.
did you find that you were very people pleasing in your early relationships?
Yes, absolutely. Being a
And
people pleaser is something I struggle with to this day. Yes.
okay. And did you find that you were people pleasing, but then after you're people pleased enough, you would sometimes get really angry and frustrated and have a little bit of volatility? Or was it more like I always lean towards just a lot of people pleasing?
I think I would, it's so interesting. I feel like my people pleasing is actually outside of my romantic relationship where I feel like I can be pretty honest inside of a relationship.
Got it.
So,
Okay.
yeah, I don't know if I resonate so much with that, but I definitely have always been more of the passive one in the relationship,
Yeah.
a little bit
Okay.
more reserved.
Okay, beautiful. And then also, what were your biggest fears in relationships? Would you say they were more about like abandonment and not being good enough, or being alone or excluded or disliked? Or would you say it was more like being betrayed, being trapped, feeling helpless or powerless?
Honestly, I was just sexually attracted to the dudes that were unavailable. And I
Yeah.
didn't feel that strong attraction for the men who showed up and wanted to treat me super well. And I'm not saying everybody that I dated was not a great person. That's not true, but it was almost like I wasn't even cognizant of any fears. It was kind of an attraction thing.
Yeah, yeah. And then when you would get into those relationships, what did you ever have moments where you felt like hurt? And would you feel more hurt like they're not showing up, they're not giving me what I need, like they're not consistent? Like would you feel any anxiety or sadness around that?
My very first relationship, my first love was like 4.5 years long. That one, I feel like I experienced all of the things. And then when that one ended really painfully, I didn't feel hurt by the other ones, and I'm thinking it's because I didn't feel a strong connection to them in the first place. And
Yeah.
so it was really that first relationship where I felt scared that, he was going to leave, or I felt like he was lying to me, which newsflash, he was. And, I felt like out of control. In all my other relationships, I have felt very in control after that.
Okay. And sorry, 2 last little quick
No, yeah,
questions
please.
here.
This is so interesting.
Yeah, and because we're really narrowing it down, and then, did you find in the next relationships that you would be you didn't feel the connection as much because they were more secure people and you were just, not that interested in that kind of personality. Again, all that attraction was really towards people who would kind of be emotionally unavailable and avoid you or dismiss you.
Yeah, I think the people who were present and available felt clingy to me. But now looking back, I think they were just healthy or securely attached or whatever.
Mhm.
And I almost felt like, oh, I might be kind of overwhelmed or suffocated by this person, which isn't
Okay.
necessarily true. But I wasn't
Yeah.
even cognizant of it. It was just kind of a turn off.
Yeah, 100%. Okay. So, when you're looking at some of these different dynamics, you are most likely let me ask you one last question.
Yes.
What was your childhood like? Did you have a lot of ups and downs, or was it more like inconsistency?
Child of divorce. I went back and forth between two homes, and there was a lot of consistency in the inconsistencies in a way. There was definitely some chaos and some not so great things that I witnessed in one of my
Okay.
households. And so I kind of had these different ends of the
Yeah.
spectrum, I would say. A little,
Yeah.
one was pretty secure and one maybe was a little chaotic. So I had both.
Okay. Yeah, so this makes perfect sense. Okay, so
Okay.
I'm gonna, like, break this down for you because it's, like, a little bit complicated for somebody listening to the first time.
Okay.
Anybody else who's listening for the first time? So, a lot of times, we have a primary attachment style, and then we have a bit of a secondary attachment style.
Okay.
So, they'll have this overarching theme from their childhood, but they'll have a little bit of wounding from the other attachment style, and almost certainly you have some secure in there, but with a bit of a secondary fearful avoidant attachment style because fearful avoidants have that like they get anxious and they often are attracted to more emotionally unavailable people,
Yeah.
but then they also feel suffocated or trapped kind of easily. And so they'll tend to be in an experience where like they don't have a ton of volatility per se, but they're kind of in this push-pull place where they won't really invest or let their guard down with people who are too secure because
Mhm.
honestly, if a big part of the subconscious comfort zone is chaos, you asked a question earlier and you were like, why would I be emotionally attracted to unavailable people?
Yeah.
Usually because we are attracted to people who treat us the way we treat ourselves. And so
Mm.
if you are a little bit emotionally unavailable to yourself, then you
Yeah.
end up being attracted to people who mirror that back to you because the subconscious mind says, oh, this is familiar and thus it's safe. So I'm going to invest in what's safe and where I'm most likely to survive because it's something I know. And at the end of the day, we're just survival wired. So what ends up taking place is that you get into a relationship dynamic where it's like, okay, there's some security because you had some secure patterns, which makes a lot of sense to me because fearful avoidants generally have a little more volatility. Like bigger fights or arguments or things like that. And that to me, when I was looking for it, I was like, "Oh, I don't see a ton of that really." But
Yeah.
you had both the anxious and avoidant side, which is extremely characteristic of the fearful avoidant attachment style. So what I would say is that you probably had some secure attachment in there for sure, but with these shadows of fearful avoidant where you're like pulling back and forth and you like, you want connection, but you may be a little bit more prioritizing not letting people in too much or being too vulnerable to others.
So interesting. Yeah, as far as like because there was some yelling in my household, I was very turned off by that. If
Yeah.
somebody raised their voice, I'd be like, I'm done. Shutting down.
Get
So
away.
I
Yeah.
didn't, yeah, I didn't feel like that in a relationship. So now I've been with my husband for 8 years and I feel like, I mean, I think that we have become more emotionally secure and securely attached together. I think in the beginning of our relationship, we were both in a pattern that wasn't great. And I think that has really significantly changed over time. It feels like a completely different relationship in, going on year 7 and 8 than it ever did. So, can you change your attachment style? How does that work? I know for me, it's when I did a lot of my own, personal growth or therapy, I started to become aware of it, but I would love to hear it from your perspective.
Yeah, 100%. So I like to think of our attachment styles just being the subconscious set of rules that we learn about love, what's comfortable, what's safe, what we should invest in or be used to. And so it's not like this disorder. It's not something that's like finite and you're set with. It's also not there's a little bit of fluidity in it. Like it's not like you just get put in this one little category and that's it and is exactly your patterns for your whole life. It's the
Yeah.
tendencies that we'll have. It's the trends and patterns we'll see in our relationships. And so the beautiful part of this is these patterns that we've learned, we're not born with them. They get conditioned into us through repetition and emotion. So by working on core areas of our relationship to self and other, we'll actually be able to change any patterns that may have created some dysfunction. So when we look at it from this sort of overarching theme, what you'll see is there's major pillars that we have to work on when it comes to becoming securely attached and really changing that attachment style to become like that best version of ourselves. And those pillars end up being working through our painful stories about love and connection.
Mm.
So some of those stories could be the story that I'll always be abandoned, or the story that I can't trust people, or the story that people will trap me or engulf me. So when we work through and we really challenge those concepts or ideas about love, and we realize, hey, that may have been my experience, but that doesn't have to be what all relationships are about. And we can actually work through that. That creates a profound amount of healing. And there's actually tools that we can use to recondition these things more quickly that I'm happy to sort of share a little bit about. But
Yeah.
that's that first really big piece. The second big piece is we have to learn our needs in a relationship. Our needs are a huge part of how we learn to love, how we learn to give and receive love when it comes to other people. And so when it's like, hey, here I am in a situation where I don't know what I need, then I'm
Yeah.
going to have a much more unfulfilling relationship because I can't communicate that to a partner. I can't share that with somebody. And so I'm going to be left feeling like my cup never really gets filled. So learning our needs, learning how to communicate those needs to other people are absolutely massive so that we can feel taken into consideration. We can feel loved in the way that we're looking for. And then learning how to establish healthy boundaries so that we feel comfortable being ourselves around people. We feel comfortable sharing our true yeses and nos with people. And being able to communicate those things over time are so important because if we're just, people pleasing our way through relationships and we never share our true boundaries with others, it's like we're only giving people the opportunity to see us on our best days. When we're like
Mm.
the good version of ourselves, we're showing up perfectly. Well, if you're really going to let somebody in and you're really going to work to receive love, it also has to be in your imperfect moments. It also has to be when you have to say a hard no, or you need space, or you need time. So those are four major pillars that can really allow us to work through these subconscious patterns that we've acquired if any of them were not really optimal to begin with.
Makes a lot of sense. You talked about kind of understanding or knowing what your needs are, and I think that was a huge turning point in my relationship where I realized, oh, I need and want more emotional intimacy. And I didn't realize that I was actually uncomfortable with it. So maybe subconsciously kind of keeping certain things at bay or not diving into certain things. And my husband and I did couples therapy. It was absolutely life changing. We're gonna talk about it on an episode, but there was a conversation that we were having, and we were talking for like over an hour, which was kind of unusual for us at this point in our relationship. We were really, trying to go deeper with each other and give each other that attention. And I told him, like, after about an hour, I was like, whoa, I noticed how really uncomfortable I am with the fact that you are giving me this much attention. I just I am not used to this much attention from maybe a male figure or something. And so it kind of washed over me, and I had no clue that I was actually more comfortable in the past with bits and pieces of male attention versus somebody's complete full attention. So that clicked big for me. And I don't know if you want to expand on that in any way or any kind of realizations around that for people.
100%. It's such a beautiful share. And the reason for this is that there's a couple really interesting things that I think like I wish everybody on the planet just knew or got taught earlier. And it's that number one, our conscious mind is responsible for 3 to 5% of all of our beliefs and thoughts and emotions and actions. And
Mm.
our subconscious mind is 95 to 97%. What happens is our subconscious mind is running the show.
Oh my
And our
gosh.
conscious mind can't outwill or overpower our subconscious mind. It can recondition patterns, but it can't. If we've ever had the experience, like everybody's had this experience, like you're like, I'm gonna quit eating chocolate, and you like can do it for a day or two, and then you're back to eating chocolate. Or you're like, oh, I'm gonna stop procrastinating or stop sabotaging or stop whatever the pattern is, maybe an unhealthy pattern you're trying to break or a new pattern you're trying to create. And then you don't follow through. That just exemplifies your conscious mind versus your subconscious. Like your conscious can intend, but it's a whole other, ball game to actually get that information into your subconscious and make it habitual and pattern it in. So, or
Mm.
break an old pattern. So what ends up happening is our subconscious, which runs the show, really kind of like we touched on briefly earlier, wants to maintain that comfort zone of what's most familiar. So if we grew up in a household where we didn't get consistent emotional intimacy from parents growing up in the way that we needed, then our subconscious mind says, okay, love is me not really getting that consistent emotional intimacy. And
Oh,
even though our conscious mind may be able to evaluate and logically analyze and say, that could be good for me. I should, or even things like I should stop being attracted to emotionally unavailable men. Like we can logically know that, but our subconscious mind will actually reject or deflect or deny or invest in people who mirror that old pattern back to us and deflect something that's other than that. So you may
wow.
see that consciously we can say, hey, I want something different here. I want more depth or intimacy. But then when you're actually in the situation, there's this awkwardness or there's this discomfort because what that actually is essentially the voice of your old patterns going, no, 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 this is not something we're familiar with. We have to stay safe by staying with what we know, with what's comfortable. And so, so many people have this experience. I often give people this exercise to do. It's called their relationship shadow. And
Ooh.
I get them to look at the things that trigger them about other people and then ask themselves, where do I do this in the relationship to myself? Because what makes these patterns stay alive is because we are also enacting them with ourselves. So just out of curiosity, if you feel comfortable sharing,
Yeah.
did you find that at that period of time in your life before sort of doing some of the deeper work, did you find that you also weren't fully available to yourself at times? Like you would kind of, dismiss your own feelings or kind of repress feelings, or where did you stand with that?
Absolutely. Prioritize everybody else's feelings above my own was just my default. And it's been so hard to try to flip that. But oh, yeah, to the point where sometimes I didn't even know how I was feeling because I was so not in touch with my own
Yeah.
emotions or kind of compass there.
And so then your conscious mind at times probably like reflected and said, oh, like I, shouldn't date emotionally unavailable men, like maybe circa back in the day when you would keep investing in emotionally unavailable people.
Right.
But then then your subconscious says, yeah, but this is what we like because this represents the relationship we have to ourselves. So it's what's familiar. And every single person has this.
Wow.
And and it's one of the biggest sources of our frustration in relationships because we don't realize why we go reenact the same patterns and the same triggers and we get so frustrated. But it's like, hey, there's actually when we're willing to look at that subconscious comfort zone and what it is, there's like some really powerful information there for us to discover. And so if somebody listening can take the thing that triggers them, and I'll share a personal one too, so people have other examples. Like for me, I would get so triggered if I felt like people were taking advantage of me growing up.
Mm.
And I would be like, "Oh, like advantageous people," like that would trigger me so much. And then when I like did the shadow work exercise on it, I was like, "Oh, I take advantage of myself all the time to please other people." Like I have this pattern of like
Wow.
going
Yeah.
against my own boundaries to try to like appease things that I think are important, or like running myself into the ground to do things for other people. And like that's me being advantageous of myself. And so no wonder it triggers me in other people. And like we'll see this with people who are afraid of abandonment. They often self abandon. That's what keeps that abandonment pattern alive. People who are afraid of being trapped, they often don't set healthy boundaries well enough. So then they trap themselves in situations. Like this goes everywhere, but it's a really powerful discovery exercise to feel like, oh, no wonder I do this. There's a whole lot more to the story there.
Unbelievable. I can't you said 97% is the subconscious mind is running the like that is wild to me. It's like the guy in the boardroom who's asleep is the one running the business. That does not make
Yeah.
any sense. Why? So unfair, right? The 97%, the 3 to 1 as far as 3 insecure attachments and 1 secure. So yeah, we have kind of an uphill battle for us with this stuff. I have a question for you about where maybe codependence comes into play with any of this or all of this. I know that for me, I was very surprised to find out that I had been codependent. And because I've always been very independent and I didn't really understand the definition of codependency. And, maybe sometimes too independent, kind of to a fault. And kind of realizing that I would often do the work of two people in a way in any relationship dynamic really
Mhm.
was strange, and I to kind of find out that I was actually protecting myself in a lot of ways. So what is the relationship with codependency with attachment styles, if any?
Such Yeah, it's such a great topic and such an amazing question. So generally, you'll see that we have two attachment styles that express a lot of codependency and one that expresses counterdependency. So the end game, the goal we want is interdependence, which is like I can take care of my own self and self-soothe and show up for my own needs and work through my own stuff. But I can also lean on you for support and care and connection if I'm in a relationship with you, right? So that's interdependence. That's what securely attached people do well.
Mm.
Fearful avoidance and
Yeah.
anxious attachment styles are both quite codependent. So, what this means is they will tend to prioritize other people first and put themselves last. And they will tend to ignore their own feelings, needs, boundaries in favor of trying to connect. They feel often responsible for other people's feelings and needs. And so they'll, go to great lengths to solve things for other people, but not necessarily give that same level of care and connection in the relationship to self. And
Mm.
this is because both fearful avoidance and anxious attachments share this need to like not, have people think lesser of them or think they're not good enough or that they're unworthy or that they're bad in some kind of way. And so they'll really prioritize that. And you'll often see them feel like if other people are okay, then I know, then I feel safe. Then I feel like I'm okay too. So
Mm.
there's a huge relationship there based on the way that they get conditioned growing up. Dismissive avoidance, that strong, really avoidant one that leans exclusively towards avoidance, they usually end up in situations where they feel like I'm going to reject any attempts for somebody to ask me to compromise. So
Mm.
usually what happens for dismissive avoidance is because they're modeling in their behavior growing up, they're taught like, "Hey, figure it out for yourself. Deal with it yourself," right? If they're emotional or they express emotion growing up, it's like, "Ah, get out of here with that. Like, don't bother us with it." And so there's no room for them to have emotion. So as a result of that, what you'll see is that's their expectation. Those are their subconscious set of rules around love. They're like, "Oh, everybody should be out for themselves and figure it out on their own." And then we'll come together in a relationship and hang out and have some very high level exchanges, but we're not really going to get too close. And so when people make bids for connection or ask for their needs to be met by this person, you'll generally see counterdependency, which is a rejection of any sort of exchange or compromise and sort of like an unfortunate deadening in a way of reciprocity because they'll really put a pin in things if they feel like they're asked, for too much. But
Yeah.
at a deeper level, it's also because they don't know how to receive from anybody. And they share that with the fearful avoidant. Fearful avoidants are often they give so much, but they under receive, which was probably some of your patterning.
Yeah.
But when you see the dismissive avoidance, they don't know how to give and make compromises, and they don't know how to receive. And that's what really constitutes a lot more of counterdependency.
There was another big turning point for me about around people pleasing, and this was years ago, where somebody had said, if you're people pleasing, you're lying, and if you don't,
Yeah.
if you don't want to be a liar, really focus on this. And I had never thought of it that way. I thought I was protecting everybody and trying to make them happy, and really I wasn't being as authentic as I should have been, to have a real connection. Can we do like maybe a little litmus test with these four attachment styles? How do each one of them react? Let's say it's a romantic relationship, and maybe they text or call their partner or somebody that they're dating, and the other person takes a while to respond to them. Maybe hours, maybe days. Some probably spiral, maybe they all do. What is each one kind of feeling in that moment?
I love this question. So, a securely attached person, if they don't hear from somebody, they won't personalize it. They'll sort of be like, oh, okay, no big deal. But they will communicate if they have a need. So, if somebody doesn't answer for a couple hours, not going to bother them. But if somebody that they're dating and they have a fairly serious relationship with or a connection building with suddenly goes missing for like a day or two, they'll go to that person and say, hey, look, I have feelings, I care about this situation, but I'm also needing consistency. So,
Mhm.
I want to see that we can have consistent connection and communication in the relationship. So they'll advocate for a need while not personalizing the experience
Mm,
because they have less core wounds, right? So they're not making everything mean things about them because of painful past experiences where they were made to feel that way.
yeah.
Now, if we look at the anxious attachment style will spiral and they will make it mean they're about to be abandoned, they're disliked, they're rejected. They'll have all of this suffering come up and they'll usually text or call and really like do everything they can to try to maintain proximity. They may even do things and they're so sweet and well intentioned, but obviously it usually has the reverse effect. They may even like show up unannounced to drop off some dinner or to drop off a note or things like that. But even though that person may be sort of expressing that they need space or,
Mm,
they're having sort of a boundary by not texting back in a sense. So they will go out of their way to constantly get closer. Then our dismissive avoidant, if they don't see somebody respond and it's been a little while, so this is the opposite end of the continuum, that very dismissive avoidant one,
yeah.
they will tend to shut down, not really respond back, maybe not even notice, maybe feel like they get a break. They generally won't have a lot of fear or concern if somebody's not responding. It won't really spiral them at all. They may even feel a sense of freedom around this space from somebody. Last but not least, the fearful avoidant, that one that sort of shares in both sides there, they may feel anxiety around something, but from that place of anxiety, they may shut down. So they may
Mm,
feel anxious, like, oh my gosh, this feels uncomfortable. Where's this person? What's going on? But then internally, they might be like, I don't want to be this vulnerable to somebody. So if they're not really caring about me, I'm just going to shut down and protect myself back. And they'll
mm.
sort of protect back from that situation. You will see times that the fearful avoidant can cling and have that anxious activating side too. But you'll often see a lot of the pulling away rather than the going towards as well.
Oh, so interesting. What you describing that made me think of when I was younger. If I maybe didn't hear from somebody, I just would pretend like it didn't bother me, even if it did.
Pretend.
Yeah.
Exactly, the key word,
Or
yeah.
yeah. Or
Yeah.
I would just, like, all right, well, this person, I don't know where they're at. So I'm just gonna book a date with this person over here because
Exactly, yeah, and
protecting
it's like these.
myself or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly, and would it be fair to say that, like, you would still feel uneasy about it initially, but then you would go into coping by doing a date or pushing away or pretending you don't care even though it didn't feel very good for you?
Absolutely, and but, sometimes I didn't even realize I cared because I think I was so used to it, but looking back
Mhm.
now, I see I absolutely cared. But
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
it took me a while to even realize I cared about any of that.
yeah, 100%.
So what styles work together and what don't? I mean, it seems like we're all trying to become more securely attached, right? So that's an ideal partnership, but are some other attachment styles working pretty well together if they don't change anything? How does that work?
It's a great question. So, people raise this all the time. People will say, like, just date people who are secure. It will help you become secure. Just invest in secure people. But to your point earlier, and I see this all the time, if you are not securely attached in some sort of capacity, if you don't have some secure patterns in there, then like you're not attracted to securely attached people because we're just attracted to the subconscious comfort zone of how we treat ourselves. So like people will say, yeah, just date somebody secure, but it's like, yeah, but you're not necessarily going to even want to do that. And so I was a fearful avoidant. I was a really strong, like more overt fearful avoidant. And so I was hot and cold and push pull and I like secure people I thought were boring. Like I was like, what? What's going on here? Like why
Right.
are they so stable? What's wrong with them? Until I did a lot of that inner work and healing myself. And so, you're
Yeah.
not going to be attracted to things that are so different from that subconscious comfort zone. So the main things that you'll see is um attachment styles of the same style rarely end up with each other. So you're rarely going to
Ah,
see two anxious people end up with each other because they again, the subconscious comfort zone is like the opposite or the same ends of a magnet. They repulse each other, right? If somebody is
right.
like has that side, then it's going to be difficult for them. People who are dismissive avoidant, they're generally not gonna be with other dismissive avoidant people because, nobody's making the first move. Everybody's, like, keeping everybody at arm's
Oh my
length and at
gosh,
a
right.
distance, and nobody's gonna invest and build a connection and allow there to be more vulnerability. The only attachment style that you'll see end up with each other is 2 secures, because that's their subconscious comfort zone, or 2 fearful avoidants. So, people who both share in that kind of push-pull because fearful avoidants have that anxious and avoidant side. So they have sort of these competing needs and competing parts of their personality or comfort zone. And so, what you'll see when two fearful avoidants get together is it can be a little roller coastery. Like there can be like ups and downs and more like miscommunications and misunderstandings happen a lot and things like that. Um, but you'll often see like an anxious with a fearful avoidant or a fearful avoidant with a dismissive avoidant or an anxious with a dismissive avoidant. Like they can all end up together of interchanging attachment styles. And I am the biggest believer that exactly who we get attracted to in a relationship and how they trigger us is a huge opportunity for growth because exactly what each person needs to heal in the relationship to make it work also just so happens to be the things that they need to heal within the relationship to themselves. So
Mhm.
so let's say you have like an anxious attachment style who's the fear of abandonment and a dismissive avoidant who's like fear of too much closeness ever, then they'll ping off each other, right? Like the anxious attachment style will feel the dismissive avoidant pulling away. They'll try to get closer to them. The dismissive avoidant will feel trapped. They'll try to push away further, and they'll trigger each other, and they can cause it can be like a spiral. But the anxious attachment to make the relationship work, they need to learn to have a sense of self. They need to learn to self-soothe. They need to learn to actually have boundaries and stop people pleasing so much and be more authentic. And the dismissive avoidant, they actually need to learn to open up a little bit, to be a little more vulnerable, to let somebody in, to share some personal things about their own needs and boundaries. And that's what they need to make the relationship work together. But those are also the things they each need for their own greatest expression of healing and growth. And so, things are coming into our lives, in my opinion, for really powerful reasons. And if we can unpack what those things are and take the lessons away, it benefits both the relationship and the individual person.
Oh my gosh, I'm having so many breakthroughs with this conversation. But something that you said, this is making so much sense to me. I guess I've done individual therapy, but did couples therapy for a year with my husband, and I felt like I just loved couples therapy so much because it felt more tangible. It felt like there was some examples that somebody was seeing that we could really break down, and then we each get action steps. And I guess I just liked that structure, and I just felt, I don't know, I felt like sometimes with me in therapy, probably because I've not always been in touch with my feelings, it felt like I was just kind of talking into a void, and I didn't really know how I felt about certain things. But being in a setting with my husband and a therapist really brought out so much authenticity and real feelings. So I just wanted to share that for anybody who may be tuning in that maybe, I don't know, hasn't tried it yet. I don't know what your experience or thoughts are with couples therapy and attachment styles, anything that you want to share.
I do want to say, like, I feel like part of why you took so much out of it is because, like, you can tell you just have such a, like, passionate, curious nature and that you're, like, truly in there to do the work, and I believe that that's, like, the first prerequisite is, like, you have to have this state of openness and curiosity and willingness to learn, and then there has to be the willingness to do the work. Like, I spend a lot of time I don't work in with couples anymore, but I spend a lot of time working with couples, for about 10 years, and and day one, first thing I would be looking for, I really didn't care what people's attachment styles were, what their pairings were, if it was a too fearful avoidance or an anxious and a dismissive or like that wasn't that relevant to me. I was more like, are they willing to do the work and are they open to learning? And if I had those, everything else would flow. Like everything else would go really, really well. And we could work through the core wounds and fears in the relationships. We could get them to understand their needs and express them to each other and have those like breakthroughs and that growth. We could get them to establish better boundaries and we could get them to, have these beautiful, dynamics that came out of doing the couples work together. But there had to be that baseline first of willingness to learn and the willingness to invest in actually doing the work. And that's where the magic happens because
Yeah.
it's really repetition and emotion of new patterns that rewire us so that we can have new ways of relating to each other. And if we're not showing up and practicing those tools and practicing those tangible action steps, then you don't get the repetition and emotion. So you don't get the rewiring. So then we just stay stuck in our old patterns. And so it's one thing to learn and understand, it's another thing to apply. And to your point, that's really where the transformation takes place.
So now I'm like trying to think about what my husband has been. You said if I had maybe been fearful avoidant, you said those can end up with each other. Is there another person or attachment style that usually ends up with a fearful avoidant?
All of them can honestly, because
Oh,
people have like the yeah, that's like the one that's
okay.
most it's most kind of all over. So you struck me as like, yeah, the more avoidant side of fearful avoidant. What patterns did you see with him? Would he be like more clingy? Would he withdraw more? Was he kind of back and forth on things?
Not clingy, not jealous, very much like, he's kind of a one man island in a way where what that kind of, became a barrier for us too. And I was also his first girlfriend. So he married his first girlfriend. So he didn't have prior
Wow.
relationship experience to kind of look at or reflect on. So, yeah, he had kind of
He was a
talked about.
dismissive avoidant,
Oh,
probably.
interesting. I was gonna say he kind of realized that he kind of had a wall up in a
Yeah.
way to protect from rejection because he felt rejected by people in the past. So this
Oh my
all,
gosh.
was huge,
Exactly.
huge breakthroughs for both of us,
And
Yeah.
because some other things you'll see, and of course this is like a human thing, but it's really big. It's much, much bigger for dismissive avoidance. Like nobody likes criticism.
Oh,
But criticism for a dismissive avoidant, like it's just they really take it to heart. And it's like a really big thing more than with others. Did you see that in his patterning a little bit?
yes, yes. And I'm not saying anything that he wouldn't say himself. But yeah, that was a big thing that
Yeah.
we worked on in therapy where he felt that any kind of even constructive criticism he felt as an
Yep.
immediate attack and didn't realize why,
Yeah.
and I almost was used to criticism. So criticism didn't
Yep.
really bother me very much, so wasn't understanding. We were just total polar opposites
You
in
guys
that
are like
way.
the exact fearful avoidant, dismissive avoidant.
Yes,
Fearful
yes,
avoidance, they tend to because there's this comfort zone around it. They tend to not really like if somebody says something, they're kind of like, okay, cool, whatever. Or sometimes they'll take it in well and be open to criticism, and other times they'll kind of just deflect, like, okay. But um, did you find sometimes too that you were a little bit more offended or affected by behaviors? Like a pulling away or a not showing up or like the almost like inaction of things had the power to affect you more than the saying of things. Was that sort of a pattern in
yes.
there too?
Yes, I
Yeah.
absolutely as far as, love languages and all that, I'm an acts of service girl through and
Yeah.
through.
Yeah. Yeah.
Love actions. You can say beautiful words to me, but if the actions aren't there, it's not registering the same at all.
Yeah. 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 So you'll see a lot of these like interesting threads in there. And the work ends up being for like a fearful avoidant and dismissive avoidant pairing, the work ends up being um to open up, to practice vulnerability, to share, to make room for that side of the relationship in various ways. The fearful avoidant has the ending people pleasing part too, because there can be a lot of the people pleasing in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just so interesting. It's so interesting to hear your journey because a lot of those threads are clear things that you've worked on, which by the way, doing those things that you've done help you move into secure attachment, right? Help us actually
Right.
rewire the subconscious set of rules that we're used to having into things that are much more productive and healthy and balanced. So it sounds like you did a lot of that work in therapy, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
And did you see a lot of those shifts and patterns in your relationship as a result?
Absolutely. I mean, it really feels like it's been a 180 shift in our
Yeah.
relationship, which actually I've had to kind of confront a lot of beliefs that I used to have that I don't know. I don't really know if relationships can change or how much people can change. And the relationship with my husband is so different that I've actually had to admit that my beliefs were wrong,
Yeah.
and that's kind of tough too because I can't believe how different it is. And
Yeah.
I'm still getting used to it. Does it? We're only kind of maybe like a year and a half, maybe out of it, that I'm still learning to trust that this is truly our new relationship dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's so beautiful. And it's interesting. So there's different stages of relationships. And part of making it out of the power struggle stage is that. So we go dating is the first stage. Then we go into the
Mm,
honeymoon stage, which is that like blissful, like rose-colored glasses stage. And then when we start letting our guard down and getting like more comfortable, we move into the power struggle where we'll start to like magnify each other's like fears or flaws or faults or things that we get triggered by. And then to make it out of the power struggle, we need to have vulnerability. We need to have communication. We need to learn each other's needs. We need to learn each other's pain points and sort of struggles and be able to adopt healthy strategies for how to navigate those things.
mm.
And then we move into like the stability stage and then the commitment and bliss stage. And ultimately, the bliss stage of a relationship is like the honeymoon stage. But you truly deeply know somebody this time. It's not just like
Oh,
rose colored glasses. So it sounds like you moved out of that and into the progressive relationship stages, which is like such a beautiful thing to see.
that makes so much sense because we've even said like this feels like a whole new relationship. It almost feels
Yeah.
like a honeymoon stage in a way, which is so
Yeah.
so weird to be
嗯
8 years plus into something and feel that way. Um, I was curious to know if it speaking of the five love languages, the four attachment styles, are there any? What's the relationship between those? If people kind of like the love language tool for themselves.
It's such a great question. So I find that there can be like a correlation sometimes between love languages and attachment styles, but I will say, like, I very much respect and admire the work of Dr. Gary Chapman, who is responsible for the five love languages. And for your listeners, I'm sure they maybe know already, but they
Yeah.
are quality time, physical touch, acts of service, words of affirmation, and gifts. And all of them are pretty self-explanatory, but I've actually found very conclusively and congruently that our needs are much more potent in terms of how we give and receive love than our love languages. So
Mm,
I'll give an example. So I'm a very quality time person in terms of
same.
love language, but I have a big emotional connection need. And I can tell you right now that, like, if I'm spending quality time, but I'm either having a deep conversation that's going to meet the need for emotional connection or quality time watching television with somebody where we're just hanging out and watching TV,
Yeah.
it's night and day. Like one does not even hold a candle to the other. So yes, both are quality time, but I like to think of love languages as more of like the umbrella and the needs are like the more specifics. And when we really get clear on the needs we have in a relationship, we feel so much more deeply seen and loved and connected because it's exactly what we're looking for to kind of fill that bucket that we have. And so I find needs to be such a deeper way of feeling that love and connection. And generally, when we look at like needs by attachment style, anxious attachment styles, I can rattle off some needs that each one has so people can maybe have a couple key takeaways. But
Yeah.
anxious attachment styles, they tend to need a lot of validation, a lot of reassurance, a lot of certainty. They want to feel really wanted and important and seen and prioritized. And they want like that consistency of connection in their relationships. Dismissive avoidance, they tend to really want their freedom, their independence, their autonomy, but they also respond exceptionally well even though they won't often show it on their faces at the beginning, they respond really well to being appreciated and acknowledged, to being empathized with,
Yeah.
supported, And accepted, feeling like they're not shamed, like they're really accepted for all their moments, like good and bad is just like such a way they feel loved. And again, it's like such a deeper way to receive love than like some of what you would see as their traditional love languages. Like they tend to be a little bit more acts of service based with their love languages, or a little more gifts based sometimes, specifically for female dismissive avoidance, or a little words of affirmation. Like they're kind of higher level with their love languages. Fearful avoidance, they tend to need. They want to be made like a priority and to feel important, but they really value in relationships growing with somebody.
Yeah.
They actually value like being challenged by people a little bit in like a healthy manner.
Hmm.
They really want depth. So they don't do well with like superficiality or superficial conversation.
Yeah.
But again, like sort of to what we were talking about, they want someone else to get really deep, but sometimes they can like not share as much deeply with with somebody else. So that's their work. And they really need things related to trust. So they need transparency, consistency. They need like open communication to feel like they're really in that space. And they share in some of the dismissive avoidant where they really care about their freedom and independence at the same time. They don't want to feel like there's 24/7 we have to be together in all ways. They want to feel like they can keep their sense of self and their truth while being in relationship with somebody else at the same time.
Oh, yeah. My husband is very much words of affirmation, physical touch, and gifts. And I am quality time and acts of service. But to your point, like I totally agree. For me, quality time encompasses pretty much all of them. Like I want to have a meaningful full conversation. We're physical touch. We're doing something fun. It incorporates so much in that one thing. So yeah, that absolutely makes sense. At what point is this, maybe you're in a relationship with somebody and whether it's romantic or otherwise, where you're like, you know what, this isn't just attachment style stuff. This is maybe a disorder, whether it's a personality disorder
Mm.
or something like that. There's so many labels out there. There's so much, it can get overwhelming for people. And maybe somebody thinking it's also just an attachment style thing that could change, could keep them in something longer than they should be. Do you have any recommendations or input about that?
That's such a great question. So I've spent a good bit of time like trying to educate people on the differences between attachment styles and narcissism.
Mm.
So when you're looking at personality disorders, like you're going to see a few things. You're going to see antisocial personality disorder, which is like the traditional name for sociopaths, psychopaths. And you're going to see really extreme patterns there. So you're going to see a need to manipulate and exploit. You're going to see extreme patterns of anger and volatility, a certain callousness. You're going to see a dynamic where somebody is unable to really empathize and notice what you're feeling. So there's not going to be any room for your needs in that kind of situation. And those ones are pretty easy to spot. So those ones are pretty
Mm.
obvious. Generally, those types of personalities, unfortunately, have like a lot of trauma in most cases, and also have a lot of like run-ins with the law, have a lot of like, challenges and sort of legal history because there's a lot of extreme suffering and pain points there. The next one is we sort of have histrionic personality disorder, which is, not so much used as often anymore, but you'll see a lot of borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. And when we look at narcissistic personality disorder, I think this is something that gets conflated a lot with attachment styles. So when we look at narcissists, the big differences between a narcissist and an attachment style are the following. Number one, a narcissist has a grandiosity towards them that you're not going to see with different attachment styles. They constantly need to be praised. They constantly need to be put on a pedestal. They constantly need like excessive admiration and attention. And you're not going to see that in the same way with other attachment styles. Generally, a dismissive avoidant will be like, don't give me so much attention. I need space. Fearful avoidants usually are busy like praising other people and putting other people on a pedestal, as with anxious attachment styles. So
Mm.
somebody who's constantly needing to be like the center of attention, the spotlight, talk about their accomplishments, how great they are, how they're better than everybody else, that's a big red flag that we're looking at like a narcissist more than just a subconscious set of rules. It's your attachment style.
Yeah.
Um, Another big one is empathy. Um, you'll really see with a narcissist that they struggle to empathize, and they may express sympathy sometimes, but it's usually sort of as a form of manipulation. Like they'll say, "Oh, that's sad for you," so that they can then kind of relate to you and take advantage or exploit in some kind of way. Whereas you'll see with different attachment styles, there's true empathy. Like anxious and fearful avoidance tend to really empathize deeply with other people. Dismissive avoidance do too. They often express it less.
Mm.
But when you come to know them more, you'll see, wow, they really deeply have that care and that space to empathize with other people. So empathy is a really
Yeah.
big one to check in with. Narcissists will end up having a general preoccupation with jealousy, thinking that like other people are jealous of them or they're jealous of other people. So you'll see that a lot, which again, you're not going to see that to the same degree with attachment styles. Of course, people can experience human jealousy, but not like constantly thinking everyone's jealous of them or vice versa, comparing themselves to everybody all the time. So again, that would be like another big key signpost to look out for. And then you'll also see that narcissists work really hard to take advantage of people, to exploit people, to often only associate with like high power or status people. And they're really consumed with those sorts of things. And you'll see narcissists have this deep sense of entitlement. And again, you'll see those things are not dynamics that you'll traditionally see with just insecure attachment styles. Like they tend to have humility they'll tend to express needs and look out for other people. And so when we're looking at like key crucial differences, things to really recognize those big red flags, I always say like look for the grandiosity, the entitlement, the exploitation, the lack of empathy, the manipulation, and that like power status thing in the background. Because if you're seeing those, that really has nothing to do with an insecure attachment style. And those are much big pointers towards, hey, you might want to dig a little deeper into narcissistic personality disorder.
So interesting. So people with a personality disorder, do they have a certain attachment style or it's just a totally different category on its own?
It's a great question. So you'll generally see that narcissists are fearful avoidance. So again, not all fearful avoidants are narcissists
Right,
at all
right.
because narcissists have this need for like supply, like constant attention. So they have that kind of anxious leaning side, but they have this ability to really ice out and shut down and push people away and kind of like discard. So that's sort of that avoidance side. You'll see antisocial personality disorder is actually more correlated with dismissive avoidant because there's like this callousness, this even avoiding real connection at all, and almost this inability to really connect. Again, does not mean that all dismissive
Right.
avoidants have ASPD. And you'll generally see individuals with borderline personality disorder, which is more characterized by this huge overarching fear of abandonment, and then a lot of volatile behavior as a result in various ways. And also, sometimes self harming tendencies, suicidal ideation, a deep sense of emptiness, like a lot of those kind of characteristics. You'll see individuals with BPD, they generally have an anxious attachment style as their primary attachment style, and then some secondary traces of fearful avoidant in there. So those are the biggest correlations you'll see. It doesn't mean they're like directly always going to be that.
Yeah.
But what I usually get people to look for is like if you think that there's something more than just like, hey, some unhealthy patterns around love and some subconscious rules that are a little suboptimal at times. If you think there's something bigger, definitely do your research about, ASPD or BPD or NPD because unfortunately, a lot of the attachment style stuff is very solvable. I still personally wouldn't recommend staying in a relationship with somebody if you're unhappy and the other person's not willing to do the work with you, no matter what,
Right,
because,
right.
that's going to be very telling of what the future of your relationship will look like. But, it can actually be actively harmful, unfortunately, to be in a relationship with somebody with a personality disorder. It's not their fault that they have a personality disorder a lot of the time. It's the signpost of trauma, but unfortunately trauma is contagious in its own way. It's contagious by proximity. It's not contagious in a germ theory way where it like spreads like germs, but it's contagious in the sense that if we're around somebody a lot, the repetition and emotion, because it's what fires and wires, of somebody else in a traumatized space bringing up their trauma and bringing it to us all the time, unfortunately, will create trauma for the other person just by proximity, just by closeness. So we have to check into that and honor ourselves if we feel like we're in an unhealthy relationship so we don't end up in that kind of situation.
Oh my gosh. Wow. I have learned so much from this episode. I still have a
Mhm.
million questions for you. I wanted to ask you about your book, all these things, but I would love to have you back
I would
for some
love to come
for
back.
like other
Absolutely.
topics about, we talked about romantic relationships, so we could get into friendships or familial stuff and your book and all
Absolutely.
that. So for now, where can people find you and your book, your podcast, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so I'm at personaldevelopmentschool.com. There's a free attachment style quiz there if anybody wants to like go see their attachment style. And it comes
Nice.
with a report on like your core wounds and fears and all this stuff to see. And then I have a book called Learning Love, which is on Amazon. And it's really about our attachment styles and how to change our patterns. And then I'm on YouTube is my main channel. So that's personal development school dash Thais Gibson.
Thais, thank you so much for your
Thank
time
you so
today.
much for
This
having me. I had a
was,
blast. I just have to say one thing really quick. I
yeah.
love you are just so passionate and curious and open. And it's like you can see why you make such an amazing host for a podcast because
Oh, thank
all of your
you.
learning and growth and shares, like it was really fun to have the conversation.
Oh, thank you. That really means a lot. I appreciate it. All right, go check out all of the amazing resources that Thais has for you. And then I just want to wrap up with a quick shout out. So, over the years of doing this podcast, we've received a handful of wedding invitations from you. And I just wanted to take a second to congratulate Elizabeth and David on their marriage. I hope you had the best time at your wedding. I tried to write you a message on your wedding website, but I think because the wedding had already passed, it didn't have a spot for me to do that. And then I tried to look you up like a creep on the interwebs, but I couldn't find you. So figured, you know what? I'll just give you a shout out on the podcast. Thank you again for the invite and enjoy married life, baby. Talk to you soon. Thank you for tuning in to Self-Helpless. You can find our brand new merch, Patreon community, and other fun goodies at selfhelplesspodcast.com. We'd be thrilled if you left an Apple Podcast review, shared this episode with a friend, or post about it on Instagram and tag us at Self-Helpless Podcast so we could repost you and say hi. As an independently produced show, we sincerely appreciate your support. Thanks, everybody.